Sorry for the slight delay. We should be streaming live. I hope people online can hear us as well. Everything should be provided. Max Pichl joined us today, and as everybody who does the commute from Frankfurt to Marburg knows, painfully, it's always delayed, but you made it on time. So thank you very, very much for joining us. This is the second session of our Trace lecture series on the perspective of violence in the 21st century. Last week, we had our first meeting on the Ukraine, the one Ukraine. It was a panel session. And from now on, we will have lectures every Tuesday at 4 p.m. And for all the students who have enrolled, I think all questions should be settled by now. If no, you can join me after the lecture to ask all the questions you want. But I think everything that you need is on Elias or Marvin. So I guess that all the problems are solved by now. I want to welcome Max Pichl. I have taken some notes somewhere on my phone. I don't find them, but I think I do know what you're doing. Max Pichl is an acting professor of political theory at Universität Kassel, our neighbor university. And the special thing about Max, I mean, one of many special things, I think, is that he's looking at social phenomena both through the law and through political science. And I think it's really great that we have this combined perspective. He's currently situated in political theory, but he also has a doctorate in the law. And he really brings that to bear in his work, both theoretical and practical. He also worked for Pro Asyl for a long time. And I'm really always amazed because I myself have often dreamed of knowing more about the law, and I don't. And I think it's really a fruitful combination, especially for the topic that we're talking about today. And that is parliamentary investigations into right-wing terrorism, the case of the NSU-Complex. Max has published a lot about these topics, about right-wing terrorism, about the legal aspects of the rise of the right wing. He has worked on a shared project on the constitutional project of the European Union, and especially on the implications of the border regime on refugees. And I think he's really a brilliant, proponent of this kind of political and legal theory. And I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say. One more rule: we'd like everybody to wear masks. We have opened the window, but we still adhere to the mask policy. So please wear them through the entire lecture, unless you will comment something in the comment section. We'll have a microphone here so you can ask questions and make comments after the lecture. Everybody who's speaking doesn't have to wear the mask. So Max will also not wear his, and I'm wearing mine in a second. So join me in welcoming Max. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and sorry for the delay. I will talk today about parliamentary investigations into right-wing terrorism. Maybe some of you know that about the NSU-Complex, there was also a panel case before the Munich court where Beate Zschäpe and other supporters of the NSU were convicted. But I will focus here on the parliamentary investigations, because I think it's very interesting also for political science to have a look on it. What is the function of parliamentary investigations into right-wing terrorism? What are the potentials, but maybe also the barriers of such investigations? And when I'm talking in public about the NSU, which was really an exceptional right-wing terrorist series in the history of Germany, and I will come to this in a second. What was the NSU? What is the history of this murder series? I have really met different people in the audience, and also when I'm looking at cultural products about the NSU, that there's some need of finding the smoking gun in the NSU complex. So what I mean with that, many people are not convinced that 3 neo-Nazis could really conduct such a murder series from 1998 to 2011. there must be a superstructure behind this. There's also a criminal novel by Wolfgang Schorlau who insists that maybe there's the US Secret Service somehow involved in this murder series. And this is somehow confusing, I would say. And it's not just criminal stuff, because, for example, Wolfgang Schorlau was invited before a parliamentary inquiry in Baden-Württemberg to give his insights about what has happened in the NSU-Complex. So also the political field is receiving, such sometimes conspiracy theories about the NSU, because, maybe no one can imagine that 3 neo-Nazis and their support network would be able to do such a murder series. But I would say when we are looking for such a smoking gun, we are distracted from the institutional and structural problems in this NSU complex. So conspiracy theories lead us to nowhere. They distract us from institutional racism, from the interest of state apparatus like the secret services in the NSU complex, and also a problematic form of and a problematic logic of security, which we can really see in this NSU complex. So I'm not looking for the smoking gun. I'm looking for that what we know, and I think what we know is scandalous, and we should not seek for another scandal in the NSU complex, because we know about the scandal and we have to analyze them. So part of this lecture is based on my PhD in law. Unfortunately, there's up to now no English version of it, but only the German PhD, but I'm trying to do maybe some chapters I will translate into English, but it's called Untersuchung im Rechtsstaat, and this is really difficult to translate into English, because Rechtsstaat is a somehow German term. Rule of law, the English counterpart, it does not really connect that much, because rule of law, it has more political contour in the British legal system. But Rechtsstaat, what does it mean? Rechtsstaat means an institutional system emerging from the 19th century onwards, an institutional system of legal institutions to somehow control the executive and the monopoly of the state. When I'm talking about Untersuchung im Rechtsstaat, then I mean fora, which are obliged and has the task to control the executive and to search for scandals, problems, structural problems in the executive. And we have different forms of rechtsstaatliche Untersuchungen in Germany. We have the courts, we have also the ministries, but we have also parliamentary inquiries. And in the case of the NSU, up to now, 15 parliamentary inquiries were deployed, which is really exceptional for one political scandal in the history of Germany. And I will dive into that in a few minutes. But I first want to present you a short history of right-wing terrorism in Germany and how to contextualize the NSU in this history of right-wing terrorism, because maybe not everyone here is familiar with this history. And I think it also tells us a story about the handling of the Secret Service and police authorities with right-wing terrorism. Then I will draw a little bit on the functions of parliamentary committees of inquiry. What are their potentials? What are their legal instruments? I will present very shortly my methodology in the PhD, because I was trying to do not only a theoretical reflection about the investigations into the NSU complex, but I was intending for myself 35 sessions of parliamentary inquiries in the German Bundestag and also in the parliamentary inquiry here in Hessia in Wiesbaden. And there was trying to somehow, with a sociological ethnographic perspective, try to unravel what is happening there. And for the last one, I will dive into the parliamentary investigations itself in the case of the NSU complex and what was the problems and the barriers in these parliamentary investigations. So when we are looking at the history of right-wing terrorism in Germany, of course, the NSU is not the starting point. The NSU is not the starting point, but even in some public discourses, we are often starting to tell the story beginning from the 1990s. But I think this is a short view, and even after 1945, after the Second World War, there was instantly foundings of right-wing terrorist organizations and right-wing terrorist groups in Germany. There was an emergence of right-wing vigilante groups going into underground, which is one of the first blueprints, also for the NSU terror group in the 1990s. We had foundations of new right-wing parties. Some of them were abolished later on, but also the NPD, for example, has its roots in this area. And we have an influence by old Nazis towards the new movements, even with their experiences from their activities in the NSDAP and in the SS and the Gestapo. So these werewolf groups, which were founded in the 1945s, they were going underground, preparing themselves for an alleged invasion by the Soviet Union into Germany. They were hoarding weapons, TNTs, and yeah, this is also, I think, a continuity line to prepper groups, which we can see nowadays in the right-wing spectrum. I will make now a very fast jump into the 1980s, but I think the 1980s are very crucial to understand also the NSU, because many of the strategic debates in the 80s and many of the actions conducted by right-wing terrorist organizations have its roots in the 1980s. So in the 1980s, we have really many organized terrorist groups which were founded in this area. And what is very interesting in this phase of right-wing terrorism is that we have really a translation of strategies and actions from the US context to Europe and especially Germany. So strategies of the far right in the US context were transferred to Germany, for example, with the Turner Diaries, a novel which is about an alleged race war between blacks and whites in the US. And Andrew MacDonald, who wrote this Turner Diaries, his novel, somehow is also a blueprint for strategies of right-wing terrorist organizations worldwide. Because one of the strategic types which was presented in this novel is the concept of leaderless resistance. So the old Nazi groups were thinking and acting very hierarchical, from top-down processes with the old Nazis in leading instances and leading positions. But in the 80s, there's a turnaround in right-wing terrorist organizations with a leaderless resistance model, with single cells which are only operating not on a very structural basis, but they are trying to cooperate in the underground. We have in Germany the founding of leaderless resistance groups like the Kassel-Gruppe or the Wehrsportgruppe Hoffmann. And one of the main or most important terrorist attacks in this area is, of course, the terrorist attack on the Oktoberfest in Munich with 13 victims, also with the perpetrator Gundolf Köhler, who for a very long time was portrayed as somebody like a lone wolf with no network behind him. But many journalists and anti-fascist organizations and the victims themselves for 40 years struggle with the Bavarian authorities because they are saying behind Gundolf Köhler was a right-wing terrorist Nazi organization and structure, like the Wehrsportgruppe Hoffmann, for example, who radicalized Köhler, who supported him with materials. And so this is maybe one of the starting points for the discussion in right-wing terrorist attacks. Are there only lone wolves, or are there networks and structures relevant? What's also interesting, I would say, is that in this time, many also of the later attacks in the US have found their strategic concepts. In the Turner Diaries and also in the leaderless resistance strategy, it's part of the strategy of right-wing terrorist organizations to not testimony or to take responsibility for their attacks. This is a big difference in comparison to the Rote Armee faction, the Red Faction Army, because after attacks and murders of bankers or high-ranked politicians, the RAF always publish testimonies and take up responsibility for these attacks because they were trying to describe and to explain why we did this with a political ideology behind it. But in right-wing terrorist attacks, we can see that there are no testimonies. Yeah, nobody is testifying we have done this. For example, 1996, Timothy McRae, the Oklahoma bomber, and in the Oklahoma bombing, there were 168 victims. Timothy McRae never gave a testimony, but he was later found by the US authorities. But this is part of the strategy to not take up responsibility, because like the NSU told us in their manifesto, which was published later on after 2011, they explain themselves as a network of comrades with the principle deeds instead of words. So the action should speak for itself, yeah, because this is part of the neo-Nazi ideology. We are just executing the will of the masses. So we as the single neo-Nazis, we are not important, but we will portray our action as the execution of the will of the masses. Yeah? But at the same time, they know that with these attacks, they bring fear into communities which are the victims of these attacks. So this is also part of the strategies that in migrant communities, of course, everybody knows who is maybe responsible for these attacks, even if the authorities didn't take over this narrative. And then one other crucial moment for the NSU are the 1990s. This is a time in Germany which has many parallels to 2015 onwards, when there were many refugees coming to Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, with many refugee residents in Eastern Germany. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were many also Western neo-Nazi groups traveling to Eastern Germany to bring their strategies and concepts to Eastern Germany. But of course, also in the former GDR, we had racism, right-wing terrorist organizations. And so there we have a collaboration of Eastern neo-Nazis and West Germany neo-Nazis. And in Rostock-Lichtenhagen, 1992, of course, you maybe all know these pictures from the mob before the residence of refugees. For over 5-6 days, they were bringing fear to the residents. They were attacking the refugee residents' home. And this was a time where neo-Nazis in Germany really felt that they have had victories on the street, because the politicians really reacted to these attacks, and it somehow resulted in the tightening of the asylum laws, and we can even talk of the abolishing of the individual right of asylum in the 1990s, with a great coalition of the parliamentary groups in the German Bundestag. And so many of the Nazis in this time said, we had won with our violence. This is a strategy we could really use. It's successful. And so this is part of the socialization process of the trio, which we call NSU. Böhnhardt, Mundlos, and Schäpe, they were politically socialized in the 90s in Jena, and they joined the Thuringia Home Guard, neo-Nazi organization in Thuringia with over 200 people active in this organization. And they were part of many demonstrations, organizing demonstrations, but they were also sending fake bombs, for example, to state authorities in Jena. And so they were in the focus of the police authorities. And in 1998, police and state attorneys were trying to find the trio. But there was really a complete failure in the raid of their garage, where they had depositions of ammunition and TNT. And Böhnhardt, Mundlos, and Schäpe were able to escape after this police raids and were going into underground. And after they were going into the underground, they were committing an exceptional murder series in the history of German right-wing terrorism. with 10 victims in the time from 2000 until 2011. And over the whole time, they were not detected. And in the public, these murders were not associated with right-wing terrorism. So they were starting in September 2000 with the assassination of Enver Şimşek in Nuremberg, then Abdurrahim Özodoku, Süleyman Taşköprü, Fabi Kilic, Mehmet Turgut, Ismail Yashar, Theodoros Bulgaridis, Mehmet Kubajik, Halit Yozgat, and Michel Kiesewetter. And I think you can really see that the murder assassinations, they were not centralized in one federal state, but they were all over Germany. All over Germany in 5 different federal states. And besides these committing of 10 murders per execution with the same weapon in case of the racist part of the murder series, they were also committing 3 nail bomb attacks in Nuremberg and 2 in Cologne, and committed 15 robberies of banks, post office, and supermarkets. When we are thinking about the murder series, the NSU themselves, they were saying that the victims of these assassinations are enemies of the German nation. And the victims lived in different German cities and were proprietors of small shops. And I think it's also important to know that when you are before these shops, you will not have a clue that migrants are the proprietors of these shops. From the outside, it was not clear. And so it's really, and so I think everybody knows that you really have to be there. You have to control the part where you want to execute this assassination. You're not doing this spontaneously. You will really need to find out who is the proprietor of the shop. And so they were not spontaneously going there, just walking into one of these shops and committing the crime. And what is also interesting when we are talking about the cooperation and translation of concepts between the US and Germany, the nail bomb attack in Cologne, it's a copy of bombing series, which we had also in the US, but also in Great Britain, like with the neo-Nazi David Copeland and his bombing series in London, 1999. Officially, intelligence and law enforcement services deny that they ever having heard of the NSU before 2011. But I think what you really can draw out of parliamentary inquiries is that they indicate that this cannot be true. Just one example, in 2002, there's an NSU letter, a letter of the right-wing terrorist organization in the underground to publications of right-wing organizations. And in this letter, they are telling their comrades, the National Socialist underground embodies the new political force in the struggle for the freedom of the German nation. Loyal to the motto, victory of death, there will be no reverse. The NSU will never be contacted through an address, which does not mean, however, that it is unapproachable. Internet, newspapers, and science are excellent sources of information. So this is in 2002, during the murder series, and one magazine printed a thank you note in their editorial. So because of this, the domestic secret service should have known that there is a group of NSU. It's just one example. We have also other examples that there should have been knowledge about the existence of such an organization, maybe not of the concrete murders, but of the existence of such an organization. The NSU trio was supported by a network of neo-Nazis. This is also something we know from the court process in Munich and also the parliamentary inquiries and from investigations by journalists and anti-fascist groups. And one of the most important support structure was the Platten Anna network. And this network provided accommodation, passports, medical aids, even weapons and money in the underground. And what is really important about this support structure is that in the support structure there, are 30 police intelligence domestic service informants who were close to the NSU. One of the most important one is Tino Brandt, which you see above, which was one of the leaders of the Thüringer Heimatschutz. And at this time, he was an informant of the Thuringian domestic secret service. And he was one of the main figures to support the NSU in the underground. So we can really see that around this trio, and some scientists and journalists say we should not talk about a trio, but a network of the NSU. There are really different people and informants who were around this network. And it's unclear in how far information from these informants were given to the domestic secret services, or if the informants really try to use and instrumentalize the state authorities when they were not giving away information that they had. And which is also very important, these informants, they were getting financial support by state authorities, by the domestic secret services. And some of them reinvested this money directly in their right-wing terrorist organizations. So to put it clearly, public funding was used for the funding of right-wing organizations in Germany. Yeah. I will keep the history of right-wing terrorism nowadays very short, but you can see there are many, or an uprising in this right-wing terrorist attacks from 2015 onwards. We have many attacks on homes of refugees. We have new terrorist organizations like the Old School Society, the Gruppe Freital. We had the attack at the Munich Olympia Center in 2016. We had the murder of Walter Lübcke in 2019, the attack of the Halle Synagogue in 2019, and in 2020, the Hanau shooting. And there are also continuities to the NSU terror, because you can see when you're looking at the murder of Walter Lübcke in this network of people who are active in the Kassel neo-Nazi scene, there are many neo-Nazis who were politicalized and who are also organized in the 1990s, and maybe are also part of support structures of the NSU. So there are really continuity lines for over 30 years in right-wing terrorist organizations in Germany. So what to do with all the shit in parliamentary investigations? Parliamentary investigations, they have a clear task. They can be deployed by the federal state, by the German Bundestag, but also by the federal states like Hessia, Thuringia, Bavaria. And these parliamentary investigations, they have the task to clarify and evaluate the facts of political scandals, of the failures of state authorities. The inquiry should be carried out in public. So also for me as a scientist, it's possible to attend these meetings and to look what the representatives of parliament are doing there. It's about accountability of state authorities. It's also about the control of the executive branch, and also about recommendations for actions or for changes of the law. So these parliamentary inquiries, they give a final report. And after the evaluating and interpretation of the facts, they also say maybe that we have to change the law in order to handling right-wing terrorism in Germany. In these parliamentary inquiries, we can find similar procedural logics like in the panel court system, but there are also differences concerning the goals and methods. All these parliamentary inquiries are based on legal grounds. In Article 44 of the German Grundgesetz, there's the competence for the German Bundestag to deploy such parliamentary inquiries. And we have also, of course, federal laws, which give Parliament the opportunity to take out such parliamentary inquiries. And these parliamentary inquiries, they have more potentials and actions than in the regular parliamentary room, because these parliamentary inquiries, they are able to request and read files, even from the domestic secret services. They are able to make hearings of experts and witnesses, like in the panel court system, and the hearings should be carried out in public. But sometimes there are possibilities to also hear witnesses behind closed doors. For example, when there's an informant and you do not want to make visible who is the informant of the domestic secret service. But there are struggles between Parliament and the Secret Service about these public or secret hearings. So what was my methodology in analyzing these parliamentary inquiries, which were trying to investigate what has happened in the NSU-Complex? I would say I draw from three different methodological sources. So in law, we are thinking about normative structures of the law, about the dogmatic of law, and we are often not trying to look what is really happening in the rooms and places of law investigations. So my methodological sources, the first one is from the international lawyer Anne Orford, who was saying in her essay in Praise of Description that rather to look at these great normative structures of law, we should really dive into the archives of bureaucrats to really look what are the security logics of state authorities. But for a PhD about domestic secret services, there's a problem because these domestic secret services, they don't want to open their archives. And even historians who had a task to investigate about the history of the domestic secret service in Germany, they were not able to have full access to the files of the so-called German Verfassungsschutz. But when I was researching for my PhD, I really thought that the parliamentary inquiries somehow are archives of these state operations and state actions. And these are archives of bureaucrats, because these parliamentary investigations, they make visible what is visible, according to Foucault. Because their parliamentary inquiries are able to give the public access to informations the public should have not noted about. Because the domestic secret services, they have an interest in not making these informations accessible. But the parliamentary inquiries, they have tools to do this. And when you are witnessing such a parliamentary inquiry, then you are seeing the bureaucrats as witnesses. And you can see the operational logics, the structures of the state, and how far they were handling these right-wing terrorist organizations in their operational practice. And so somehow there's some sort of archives, but you really have to do research on your own to make this archive visible. So it's about power structures in these parliamentary inquiries in association and in comparison with these state authorities who are part of these investigations. So what did I done? I did what Luc Boltanski would say, an investigation of the investigation. And I was trying to somehow make visible what are the possibilities and limits of the rule of law in this case. And for every political scientist and researcher, I would really say, use these parliamentary inquiries, go there and have a look for yourself. What is the practice of state authorities? And they are not only in right-wing terrorism, there are different sorts of parliamentary inquiries, which are interesting for US political scientists. For example, the cum-ex scandal about the financial structures, or maybe also what we have now, the Afghanistan parliamentary inquiry. Yeah. One of my conclusions, and unfortunately this is in German, but one of my conclusions of my research is that investigations are not working in a streamlining way, but they are part of conjunctures. So there are struggles about the limits and possibilities of investigations. And I would typologize 3 phases in the investigations about the NSU. There's one phase I would call the combination phase. At the starting point of these investigations, there was the first parliamentary inquiries deployed in Thuringia, the German Bundestag, Saxony, and Bavaria. And these parliamentary investigations, they really had many potentials to dive really into the NSU-Complex, because there was a lot of public pressure, even from Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was saying that we need investigations into this case. There were resignations of high-rank officials of the domestic secret services. There was also a consensual political deployment of inquiries in parliament. The conservatives and the left party together said, we need these investigations. Yeah, this is not usual in the parliamentary system in Germany. So there was really a high pressure on police authorities and the secret services. And I think this is the phase in which we know the most of the NSU case. The German Bundestag and especially the Parliamentary Inquiry in Thüringen with its 1,800 long final report. This is really the phase where we get many of informations about the NSU case. And then after that, I would say we have some sort of consolidation phase. What I mean with that, this is a phase where we have a deployment of many parliamentary inquiries on the federal, in the federal states, even in Hesse or in North Rhine-Palatinate, for example. Also in Thuringia, there was a second parliamentary inquiry. But in this consolidation phase, you can really see conflicts between the parties. For example, here in Wiesbaden, there were so many struggles and conflicts between the conservatives and the Green government and the Social Democrats and the left party in the opposition. So there was no consensus anymore to do these parliamentary investigations. And this is an imminent barrier of parliamentary investigations. So the secret services, they do not have to sabotage these inquiries anymore because the parliament is not doing its job, I would say, in this phase. Yeah. And I will come to many more barriers in a few minutes. And then we have, I would say, in the last phase, the historization phase. So this is the phase where the case is closed. Yeah, the official, public, and parliamentary and courtrooms are closed, are coming to an end. But it's paradox. Everybody is saying that we do not have answers to all these questions concerning the NSU case. Yeah. Even the representatives of the German parliament, they were really saying, yeah, we don't have a clue really what has happened there. We have many details and nuances, but the big picture, this is the problem. But we have an ending of these parliamentary investigations. There are only, I think, 2 ongoing in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern and in Bavaria at this time. So what were the central questions in these parliamentary investigations? One of the central questions is how were the victims selected? Because there was no connection between them. So how were the victims selected? Were there wider supporter networks or other perpetrators in this murder series? Why did the police and intelligence services only investigate the environment of the victims? Some of the victims called us the bomb after the bomb because they were in the focus of the police authorities, and the police authorities were not investigating a right-wing background. And also, what knowledge did the state apparatus have about the murder series and the NSU? So these are the central questions, and they are not answered until today. And also one interesting aspect is, was there some sort of what in international relations and in international conflicts we call collusion in the NSU-Complex? So what means collusion? It's a term which was used in many books about the North Ireland conflict, when there were attempting murders by the British forces against people operators of the IRA. And Mark McGovern wrote, collusion is the involvement of state agents, directly or indirectly through commission, collaboration, or connivance in non-state political violence. It's maybe the informant network by the domestic secret service in the NSU case, such a form of collusion. In a Corey report, it means army and police officers must not act collusively by ignoring or turning a blind eye to the wrongful acts of the servants, or supplying information to assist them in their wrongful acts, or encouraging them to commit wrongful acts. Any lesser definition would have the effect of condoning or even encouraging state involvement in crimes, thereby shattering all public confidence in these important agencies. So it's a wide understanding of collusion. Yeah. And I've told you that through this information network in right-wing terrorist organizations, there was a transferal of public funding into right-wing organizations. So maybe this is also part of a collusion, yeah, by the domestic secret services and right-wing terrorist organizations. Yeah, this is one of the big questions, I would say, which is unresolved until today. But what were the key findings of the inquiries? And we know a lot more than in 2011. Yeah, that's the good story of the parliamentary investigations in the NSU case. So we have numerous facts proving institutional racism in the investigations. But the problem is, without naming it explicitly, only in the minority votings by, for example, the Greens and the Social Democrats in the German Bundestag, the term institutional racism is used for the investigations of the police authorities towards the victims of the right-wing terrorist attacks. But I think when you really read these final reports, there's no other way to conclude that this was institutional racism. We also know that the radicalization processes in the 90s and the network structures of the extreme right were crucial for the NSU. And this is also a point where the explanations and narratives from the parliamentary investigations and the courts differ. There are different narratives in these investigations. The court was really trying to put these questions down, and they were saying, yeah, only these three people were the main perpetrators of this right-wing terrorist murder series. But the parliamentary investigation says that there was a bigger network which we have to investigate. What we also know, the Verfassungsschutz really failed in analyzing the dangers and risk of right-wing terrorism, but I would really say the service didn't turn a blind eye to the scene. Because in the 90s, they deployed many informants, many relevant informants in the right-wing terrorist organizations, in the right-wing and in the right-wing structures. But they had the idea to control these right-wing organizations from above through the informants. This is a difference than to say the Verfassungsschutz didn't know anything about right-wing terrorism. I do not want to use this narrative. Yeah, I think they know a lot more than they really say to us in public. And we know that the informant network enhanced the capabilities of right-wing terrorist organizations, especially in Thuringia. And this is really devastating. The Thuringian parliamentary inquiry said that a series of murders could have been prevented with a more effective gathering of information between the domestic services, the police, and the state attorneys. And just for a short time, coming back to institutional racism, there's one fora in which institutional racism was named as it is. In the UN third report of 2015, they were saying, while noting the delegation's acknowledgement of the state party's difficulty in effectively investigating the series of murders committed by NSU, the Committee of the United Nations remains concerned at the state party's continued failure to recognize its systemic shortcomings in identifying and handling the racial motivation behind such acts, which may mask institutional racism. So I think this is interesting, and it's not talked about that a lot in the German public, that the United Nations here really is saying, so maybe the secret services and police authorities mask institutional racism, and you have to do a lot more of investigations into this issue. So the last part of my lectures is about the limitations but also potentials of parliamentary inquiries in the NSU-Complex. And as you can see, I think one of the most important barriers and limitations of these investigations is that many of the files which we need to have to know what happened in the NSU case are destroyed. Many of the files were destroyed even before 2011, but also after the public know about the NSU after 2011 and 2012. And I think one of the key elements of the investigations into the NSU case is that there's a struggle about files. And there are strategies of the domestic secret services and the police authorities towards the parliamentary inquiries. So when we are talking about the handing out of files, the intelligence service is able to withhold files on legal grounds. There's also a term which is not easy to translate into English, the Staatswohl. What means that to sum it up, it means that the secret services, the operations of the secret services should not be debated and be known in the public. So this is one of the key elements in the juridical discussion about the Staatswohl. And so the domestic service is saying even the parliamentary inquiries should not have the information about our informant networks and how they are working. So this is a real struggle between the domestic services and the parliamentary inquiries at this stage. And of course, I've named it, the destruction of files is important. When you do not have files, then you have a problem in these parliamentary investigations. And I will make one of the examples in a few seconds. And then this is a really absurd strategy. There's also a strategy of an overload with files towards the parliamentary inquiries. So at a time when the parliamentary inquiries are really under pressure to write their final reports, then domestic services and police authorities are saying, oh, now we have the files, so we are giving them to you. And sometimes these are 2,000 or 100,000 pages at the time when the parliamentary inquiry is trying to do the final report. So the parliamentarians at this time are not able to work with it. So everybody with whom I've talked was saying, we do not know if there's much more information in the files because we were not had the time to read them. Yeah, this is a problem, and this is a strategy, purposefully strategy by the domestic services. Because the overall strategy is the play with the time. Because we have the problem in parliamentary investigations that there's the principle of discontinuation. What means that? Parliamentary investigations should release their report during the election period. So when the election period is over after 4 or 5 years, then there's the election of a new parliament, but the new parliament is not able to do this investigation with new representatives. They can say, we deploy another parliamentary inquiry, and the German Bundestag and Thuringia did that. But when you are actually in a struggle about this investigation, you have to do this fast. And the problem is that, for example, on the federal level, the NSU case was going into public in 2011, and the German Bundestag deployed its parliamentary inquiry in 2012. And the new election period started in 2013. So they had only 1 year to do their job. And I think this is not going to work very well with such a difficult case. So one employee of the Bundestag committee in interviews for my PhD said, in the Bundestag investigation committees, the requests for evidence were often drafted as global resolutions. The principle of literally throwing files over the investigative committee is perfectly mastered by the authorities. Then you drown in files, finding what is relevant becomes really difficult. But we should also talk about the informations which are in these files, because I would say files of the domestic services and the police authorities are not neutral objects, but they are political mediums. Which information are gathered in files? This is a political decision, an operational decision. Not everything what the Secret Service knows is going into the files. There are operational tactics like the need to know principle, for example. So not everybody, even in the domestic services, should know everything about the operations on the ground. So what is going into the files is a political and operational decision. And even if you have these files, maybe there's more of the story. It's also important to know how to read and understand these files. And parliamentarians are not trained in doing this. Yeah. Like Max Weber said, state bureaucracies, they have an expert knowledge. And this expert knowledge, the representatives of parliament, they have to learn this knowledge. Yeah. Learning by doing, through workshops, for example, or when they're doing the hearings. And I think many parliamentarians underestimated this task, that it's not so easy to control the executive branch. And it's also important to classify informations correctly, to know what you are reading. Yeah, when there are signatures on files, who was reading it, to which department it belongs, who signed it. Yeah, often also only with initials. Yeah, then you have to know the bigger picture to understand this one file. This is a hard task to do in parliamentary inquiries. So one parliamentarian representative of the committee in Thuringia said to me, you have to know how it works in the security agencies. Who gets what information? Which system does it enter? Who has access to it? We have invited experts. We have invited constitutional protectors. We have had it explained to us how such a file is structured, who signs with green, who with pink, who with blue, because each department unit has its own abbreviation and its own color. For the last, I give you two examples, two concrete examples in how far it is so complicated to doing these investigations in the NSU case. It's really hard to say what is the most explanatory example for the problems, the potentials and limits of these parliamentary inquiries. I give you only two. We can maybe talk about more in the discussion. So I've told you that in 2011, there was a destruction of files. 3 days after Beate Zschäpe turned herself in to the police. 3 days after that, a high-rank official in the Federal Domestic Secret Services said, we should destroy files related to a special operation in Thuringia during the 90s with connections to right-wing organizations in Thuringia at that time. The discovery of this destruction happened in 2012 through investigations by journalists. It was not handed over by the Secret Services to the parliamentary inquiries, but then the parliamentary inquiries took up this issue and heard witnesses in the German Bundestag. But during the first hearing of the responsible secret agent, who is called Lothar Lingen, he said, yeah, there was no clear motivation or purpose behind this destruction. He was under stress, and maybe there was also data protection issues. So this was the story at the time, and the German Bundestag said, we do not have a clue what was really the purpose about the destruction of the files. But then in 2016, there was a second hearing of the secret agent, and through the investigation of files, the German Bundestag at this time know that there maybe was an intentional purpose to destroy these files. And the public agents in one of the hearings said it was the aim to reduce the public attention of the German towards the German domestic secret service in the operations in Thuringia. So there was a clear purpose and intention to destroy these files, but it took over 5 years to make this evidence clear for the public. And at that time, it was not such a scandal like in 2012, because other issues were important at this time. The refugee crisis, for example, in the broader public. And the NSU was in the consolidation phase, what I've said, and the media and the public audience, they were not really listening to what was happening then. And the second example is the hearing of witnesses and of neo-Nazis who are working as informants in the parliamentary inquiries. And there we have an example from the parliamentary inquiry in Hessia. And this is the informant of Andreas Temme, a secret agent in Kassel. Andreas Temme, I will draw out on this, but it's one of the most crucial points in the NSU case. Andreas Temme was at the place of the 9th murder as a secret agent. He is saying that he had no clue what was happening there, but there are also investigations that maybe he was there at the time when the murder was attempted by the NSU. So it's not clear what is his role in this case, but he had an informant in the right-wing structures in Kassel, and this was Benjamin Gärtner. And Benjamin Gärtner was part of right-wing organizations of Club and other structures. And concerning Benjamin Gärtner, there are two questions which arise during the parliamentary investigations. In German law of secret services, you have the difference, there you have a difference between informants. And this is also very complicated to translate into English. There are two main differences. The one is V-Leute and the other one is Gewährspersonen. And I will say V-Leute are informants and Gewährspersonen are sources. So what is the difference? Informants are recruited and controlled by a regular fee by the domestic secret services. There's a contract between the informant and the domestic secret service. And sources, they give informations like materials, flyers to the secret services, and they receive money only for these informations. Yeah, and they are not controlled and regulated and by the secret service. Concerning Benjamin Gärtner, there's the question, was he an informant or a source? And it's absurd, nobody knows exactly. Yeah, and this is really important because when you have an informant as the secret service agent, you can say, please go into that structure and bring me information from that structure. Yeah, you can regulate, you can control him. As a source, you cannot do this. And in the files, Benjamin Gärtner is portrayed only as a source. But in the files where you can read the protocols of the meetings between the secret agent and Benjamin Gärtner, there you can see that Temme was saying to Gärtner what he should do. So he was controlling him. And the Secret Service also was saying, yeah, we wanted that Benjamin Gärtner is going into the Republican Party, for example, or the Deutsche Partei, a small right-wing party at this time. So they were controlling him. And after 2012, they were also financing him a lawyer for his hearings before the panel court. You are not doing this when you only have a source. You are only doing this when you have an informant. But until today, nobody really knows, was he an informant or was he a source? Andreas Temme, before the inquiry in Hessia, said, the reports of the informant by me were partially enhanced because I didn't thought about that at any time these files could be read by parliamentarians, because I just thought these are secret files. Yeah. So Temme also towards his high-rank officials not say the truth about his informant. And so after 10 years of parliamentary investigations, we do not know if this was an informant or source. And I think in a democratic system, this is a problem with the control of the executive branch, when they cannot tell you what they were doing with these informants. To come to an end, I would say these parliamentary inquiries, they have a double function of the archives of state practices. The first function of these parliamentary inquiries and their final reports is that there we have a knowledge repository on state practices. So there we can really make visible what is visible, the power structures of domestic secret services. The second archive is that we have also a clue about the struggles between state apparatus, between investigation committees and offices for the protection of the Constitution, the Verfassungsschutz, like they want to call themselves. But this material you cannot get simply from the parliamentary inquiries. You have to do this on your own. This is the task of the researcher, to do the sociological observation of these parliamentary inquiries, to read the final reports, to be there in the room, to hear the witnesses, to see directly the struggles between the inquiries and the secret services and the police authorities. And from these observations, you can also conclude your own archive, the sociological observation or the political observation. So after 10 years of struggle, the victims of families of the people who were killed by the NSU, they are saying that the investigations have failed completely. And this after 10 years of struggle. Yeah, and I think, yeah, this is not a good reaction of the German democratic state and the rule of law towards this exceptional right-wing terrorist murder series. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was really enlightening to me. I'll give you 1 minute to drink something and check whether the camera still works. Yeah. We will have time for questions. We also have a microphone. Just sit up and run. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No worries. Just 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Thank you for the patience. We do have now the chance for you to ask questions. I will take the opportunity as chair to ask the first one. But I think we can collect 2 or 3, and then you can answer. This gives you some time to think about it. What I thought was really interesting was something you said in the beginning, and I completely agree with you that there's no need in constructing a superstructure looking for CIA informants or something like that. I think it's super counterproductive. You have told us a story of something that is in itself worth reconstructing, and I think you have done that very well. There was just one moment in the presentation when you said these right-wing terrorists actually they think they see themselves as like small figures, and they do it for a master. But who is that? Not in your view, but in their view. What do they have in mind? I would really be interested whether they explicate this or whether this is just something they allude to. Actually, you can choose if you want to respond right away. You can.
Yeah, I think just to make it quick.
Come a bit closer here.
I think. I mean, first, of course, this is their strategic narrative, of course. So they are thinking, or they are proposing throughout the public, we are acting maybe we are maybe executing the will of the masses, or we are doing something for the greater good, of German history, for example. So this is their strategic attitude towards this. But I think what we really can see, and I didn't talk about this a lot in my lecture, it's very interesting to look at the parallels between the murder series and what happened in Germany at this time. Because in beginning in the 2000s, we have some sort of liberalization process in Germany. So in 2000, we had from Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor, the Aufstand der Anständigen. So a civil society uprising against right-wing activities after the attack in Düsseldorf-Wehrhahn. For example, we had the first attempt to abolish the neo-Nazi party NPD, which was a failure at this time. There was, for example, the speaker who was saying that the Islam belongs to Germany. So there was some sort of liberalization process. And I think really that the NSU had notice of this process, and they were in their strategic narratives really thinking about maybe this is when we are trying to execute these migrants, and we can bring fear into the public, and maybe people with a migrant background, they are trying to leave Germany. So this is a clear reaction to these processes in Germany, but at the same time, also the police authorities and secret services were thinking about such issues, because the murders against Halid Yozgat and the murder in Dortmund and in Kassel, these murders were committed in 2006, right before the World Soccer ship in Germany. And the police authorities were saying, we are not allowed, or we should not make this more public, because when we are doing this, then we could potentially endanger this soccer world championship in Germany. These were real discussions in the strategic operations of the police authorities at this time. And I think there you can really see the interconnections between the strategies of the neo-Nazis, the debates in the public, and also the strategies of police authorities. And this is not intentionally, not by intent, but of course there are these connections because of this historical time lapse and parallels.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions. The word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please use the mic, because then everybody online can also follow.
Yeah, we'll take Susanne first. And yeah, please, can you, the mic is only for online. So we hear you and they hear you through the mic. It's a bit confusing. Can you introduce yourself? That counts for everybody here.
Yeah, Susanne Pichl, Professor for Peace and Conflict Studies from the Center for Conflict Studies. Thanks very much for the presentation. I think it was brilliant. And, you know, following NSU here and there and just getting bits and pieces, it was great to see it all put together, but also kind of in a conceptual way. I was very intrigued about what you said about the files from police and secret services, because I'm interested in knowledge production. So, but then the next step is, what about the report that the Enquete Commission wrote itself? And so it'd be interesting to hear from you who wrote it. What narrative does it actually have? Because it's not just a collection of individual statements, because there would be a wider story that they tell. And in particular, if the victims were unhappy with the workings of the parliamentary inquiries in the several federal states, as well as on the national level, were they unhappy with the particular narratives of the reports, or were they just unhappy with the lacking information in the course of the research?
Since we have quite a number of questions, I would say we collect 3 of them and then you respond. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, my name is Annika Oettler. I'm professor for sociology here at Marburg University. I also have a file question. You mentioned this consolidation phase, but you explained that it was a phase where there was rather a lack of consensus and where party divisions became visible. So I was wondering who was actually participating in these commissions of inquiry. And you said that they had no training and did not know how to read files, and you explained these color things. So I was wondering which kind of workshops did they get? Was it an introduction to content analysis and grounded theory, or was what was it about?
Not exactly this. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I need to introduce myself. Sorry. English, okay, sorry. I had two questions, if that's okay. The one file question as well. You didn't mention the file that was supposed to be locked away for like 120 years. I was curious why you didn't mention that. And the second one is, to be honest, I get quite annoyed when people question these institutional racism things, because a lot of people say that there's no such thing. And also because like statespersons cannot be racist because they are, I don't know, working for the state, and because it's not racist, it's not possible, and things like that. I was curious if this comes also through the reports and the informations you had, maybe different ones than we have. Like why people keep saying that it wasn't institutional racism, if we also know from the very beginning of, for example, BND, that there are that there were people from Nazi Germany.
Of course.
Please.
Yeah, to answer the first question, I mean, these final reports are also part of truth and knowledge production, of course, and not everything what happened in these investigations is also written down in these final reports. Who is writing these final reports? In fact, employees of the parliamentarians, not the parliamentarians themselves, but employees actually, who are trying to gather the information and to write it down. And then a draft of it is presented to the inquiry, and then they're trying to make a consensus about it. And then you have the majority road, and like in law also you have the minority roads, where political parties can say we think or interpret things differently, which has also something to do with institutional racism. So the majority reports are saying they are not naming it. Yeah, they are not saying this has something to do with racism. They are saying we have failures by single persons of the police authorities, for example. But in the minority roads, parties are saying clearly this is institutional racism. Yeah, for example, with the knowledge we have in other parts of this final report. So I think this final report, we really have to see it also as the outcome of a struggle in parliament. And it's one narrative which you also have to bear in mind, that you have to question it. Yeah, it's selective what of the information is written down in it. And but I would say that quite more than other informations we have about the NSU, these reports are an important starting point to think about it. And also the lawyers of the victims were saying that these reports were very important for their work in the panel process, because they were using it, yeah, as knowledge production in confronting witnesses in the panel courts. There's also, was not speaking about this in my PhD, I'm doing this, the parallels between the panel court process and the parliamentary inquiries and the interconnections between this knowledge production. So then you were asking me the question about the training and or how these people get to know what they have to do. Nobody told them. Yeah, only a few representatives were so self-reflexive that they were saying, I'm not ready for this task. I have to get more information about it. I'm asking lawyers who have more experience with files and the reading of files, and I'm doing some workshops with them. But these were only a few parliamentarians of all the 15 committees, only a few. Yeah, I've spoke to a parliamentarian of the Greens who were saying, at the end, of this process, I had the impression I'm not able to do these hearings with neo-Nazis. I was underestimating them, and I was not knowing what is really written down in these files. And this is a problem. Yeah, you have these files, you have these witnesses, but you do not know what to ask them, yeah, and what to get rid of this information. And also one of my chapters in the PhD is about a very absurd situation, because these parliamentary inquiries were also observed by journalists and anti-fascist groups, NSU Watch, for example, and they were documenting these parliamentary inquiries on Twitter and social media. And there were so many times when in the Twitter sphere, people who were inside the room of the parliamentary inquiry were saying, yeah, this is neo-Nazi X or that, and we have information about him, and he was active in this structure, in this structure, in this structure, and the parliamentarians in the room didn't have this information and were not asking these questions, yeah? Because in the room itself, you are not allowed to speak with the audience, yeah? So there were people in the room with information, but the parliamentarians who have the task to do this hearing, maybe they have not this information because they're not experts of the far right, for example. And you need this information to confront people, yeah, in these parliamentary inquiries. And so this is also a problem and a barrier of such inquiries, that you have interesting witnesses, but you're not really able to confront them. Only a few, I would really say, from all these parliamentarians, maybe 150 or so were involved in these inquiries. I would really say maybe only 5 or 6 were really experts in confronting witnesses. Yeah, only these people were reflective, who had knowledge about the right-wing organizations. For example, one of the parliamentarians, Katharina König-Preuß, she was politically socialized in Jena. She knew the NSU when she was in youth centers in Jena in the 90s. Yeah, she had a direct personal interest in doing this task in an effective way. Yeah, but not all of the parliamentarians had such an obligation to do this. And concerning institutional racism, I've quoted this one report of the United Nations. And after 2013, the victims were saying, yeah, institutional racism is the blind spot in the parliamentary inquiries. So we have to seek for other fora to raise this question. So they were going to the United Nations, a forum which has, I would say, because of the history of these forums, more knowledge about institutional racism or more acceptance of this problem, maybe. And so they were raising this question there, and were trying to bring, with the statement, we're trying to bring this issue back into the German debate, but it was not so successful. This is really a problem, because institutional racism is a key problem, I would say, to understand the operations by police authorities. Because you really have to bear in mind, these murders were committed in 5 federal states of Germany. Over 1,000 police authorities or police agents were involved in these operations, and everybody was doing the same failures. Yeah, this is not a problem of single police persons, it's a structural problem, I would say. And this is the blind spot in the investigations, yeah, until now, yeah. And only civil society actors, anti-fascist groups, or the self-organizations of the victims themselves are nowadays trying to uphold this issue and are saying, yeah, we have to talk a lot more about this. And I think this is so absurd, because also nowadays we have so much discussions about racism in the police. I mean, this year alone, I think 5 or 6 black people were murdered in Germany, or people of color, by the police, yeah? And in the public debate, the ministries of interior were saying, yeah, we have no problem of institutional racism in the police. But at the same time, we have these final reports of the parliamentary committees where we see the routines and practices of police authorities. And we should do something with these knowledge we have, yeah, but we are not doing it. And I think this is a task of researchers, yeah, and of students, of course. I mean, I have many students who are writing thesis with me who are really now trying to work with these final reports, for example, because this is knowledge production we can work with. Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple of more minutes. Do you still have stamina for another round? Who would like to ask another question?
Hi, thanks for sharing your insight. Connecting directly to what you just said, what do you think, sort of based on the concrete evidence of how these processes work in the Secret Service and in the police in Germany, what are the lessons that we should be learning about how to start to acknowledge and unravel and combat this sort of problem of institutional racism? What can we, what are the concrete steps that we can learn from this?
Yeah,
that's a beautiful final question, I think. Is there anything urgent otherwise? Okay, perfect.
There will be in a few months a handbook of police and racism by Daniela Hunold and Tobias Singelstein. 800 pages long. I was also doing a contribution to international perspectives on institutional racism. So there are a lot of answers to this question, but to say also here's something about it, I would say that the first problem is that, and I think this is one lesson we should learn from the NSU case, parliamentarians, even civil society should listen to the perspectives of the victims of racist terror and racist abuse. Yeah, and this is one of the main problems in the NSU case. At a very early point, the families of the victims in 2006 were saying, these are murders by neo-Nazis. We are absolutely clear. Yeah. And nobody was listening to them. Yeah, there was a demonstration in Kassel with 1,500 people on the streets who were saying we don't want to have a 10th victim, but there were only people from the migrant communities and no other. Yeah, and I would say this is also a task which we as scientists should take on, because also in German academia we have right perspectives on these issues, and we should listen also to these perspectives to enhance our capabilities to analyze this.
Thank you so much, Max. This was really also a brilliant conclusion to our series on perspectives on violence. I congratulate us for inviting you. And yeah, it was really good. Next week, we assemble same time, same place for a lecture by Marsha Henry from the London School of Economics on critical interventions, the gendered, racialized, and militarized politics of peacekeeping. You're all again very welcome, and have a good evening.